Welcome to Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm speaking with Desi-Rae Campbell. Desi-Rae is a YouTuber, podcaster, and commentator covering topics like identity politics, feminism, and free speech. You can subscribe to her YouTube channel, Just Thinking Out Loud, and follow her on Twitter at Desi-Rae Thinking. Today, we'll talk about Black Lives Matter, victimhood culture, and other issues. Desi-Rae, thank you for joining me on Red Pill Nation.
Hi, thank you for having me on Red Pill Nation.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you. The first thing I want to ask you, Desi-Rae, is just about you and your story. What made you want to jump into the culture war? It's something that can be quite costly when it comes to someone's energy and also just the consequences incurred on their personal life. What made you want to take all those risks and sort of jump into the culture war and make the kind of content that you make on your YouTube channel?
I don't know if I was really aware of all the risks.
Yeah.
I was aware of like socially. That's why I started making videos, because I was aware socially that I felt like I couldn't speak my mind on certain topics, and mostly like identity politics related stuff and Trump. Like in 2016, late 2016, when everybody was like hating on Trump. I mean, they're still doing that
Yeah.
now, but like when that was first really starting. So I'm not so sure that I was really aware of the social ramifications. I wouldn't say I've had huge personal costs in my life, because to me, I would say that through doing my channel, I'm glad that I started it, and I'm now like more at peace with myself, because I
Hmm.
speak my mind and speak my thoughts. But it was definitely because it was mostly because I've heard people saying things that I didn't agree with, particularly as someone who has dark skin in the United States, and
Hmm.
people would like expect me to hate Trump. That's like, it's not just hate Trump, but you can kind of
Yep.
sum it up in those words. Like they're like people who have a certain idea of what's good and what's bad in the United States, and then they like align that with your identity, which I think is horrible. Like I think ideas should be kind of separated from that. And I understand it's because they're thinking, well, X is bad for this group of people, and I just thought that kind of thinking wasn't true. So it was that, and then like just the pressure of the PC political correctness kind of pressure I didn't like. Um, and I definitely have always been a bit outspoken, like had a streak of being outspoken. So if I think of
Hmm.
in um, school, I definitely would never be afraid to speak my opinions or anything like that. So it's a combination of my personality, and then being really annoyed at the climate, the political climate, and thinking, maybe I should go, say something. And that's not to say like I wasn't like nervous or anything. Like the very first time I made a
Yeah.
video, it wasn't my first time making a video on YouTube at all, but it was my first time making a video about political stuff. However, it was because it's my personality. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. I think there's a certain personality type that you've outlined for yourself that I share and that a lot of people kind of in our circle share, whatever you want to call it, the intellectual dark web, the resistance, whatever. I often just call it the resistance at this point, everyone who's kind of opposed to wokeness. But there's a type of person who wants to kind of tell it like it is and tell the truth and not necessarily go along with these narratives. I mean, you mentioned I think one of the most damaging narratives to come out of recent times, and that is really accelerated in the past like 4 months or so, just with what's been going on since George Floyd's death with Black Lives Matter, which is this idea that your skin color denotes your political views, which I know you mentioned it was kind of a problem for you because you're like, well, I'm not necessarily going to live up to the expectations that a Black woman has to believe X, Y, and Z. I might have views that surprise people, and I'm sure that people's responses were kind of frustrating in that respect, if that's kind of what you were going for.
Yeah, that's definitely what I was going for. And you asked me why I got into this, and I think I had initially had the thought when you asked the question, but I didn't say, it's because I really wish I wasn't being dragged in. Like I really wish people wouldn't like. I felt like I had to say something, because if I didn't, then it was like people would be assuming things about me. I really, 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 really wish, especially because I'm not from the US. that I could just like not be pulled in, but because people associate things with just how you look, you have to say something. It's like you're like by default like involved in a conversation you might not even want to be involved in. So I would say that too.
Yeah, I think that's another one of the great ironies of the situation we find ourselves in. I'm also someone who I've always been political, but I never wanted it to get quite this fraught. And I think that there's a lot of examples of people like you who didn't necessarily want to get dragged into a culture war. One of the best examples is look at Jordan Peterson. The man made it to 55 years old as a relatively obscure college professor who just wanted to teach kids how to live a good life and about personality psychology. And then they started asking him to use these gender pronouns, and he had to say that this is compelled speech. Brett Weinstein, same thing. Just wanted to teach kids about biology. Sargon of Akkad just wanted to play video games. That's the meme about him. It's like there's all these people who just wanted to live their lives, and we're being dragged into this thing. I'm probably not the best example because I've always been a little political. But for a lot of people, I find that your story is reflected in theirs as well, of just like, I didn't want to become a culture warrior, but this stuff has become impossible to ignore because it's just such a strong influence. And it sounds like a lot of people were kind of coming at you with like, well, you need to have an opinion, you need to get involved. And you were like, all right. And then, maybe not doing exactly what they expect of you.
I would, okay, first of all, it's cool to have someone describe me as a culture warrior. Like, I don't use that term in my head, but it sounds kind of epic. I wouldn't really, I wouldn't really say that people were like coming at me. It was just conversations you were having. So it was like everybody just started talking about it more, and you're talking about the last 4 months. Yeah, it's like it never ends. Like you think, oh, if you just ignore things, it will go away, but that doesn't happen. And so you end up having to say, okay, fine, or at least this is what I went through. It makes sense to speak your voice. Like even recently, with oh my god, all the corporations starting to talk about black. I'm so tired of seeing the word black. Like it's so weird. Like I reached a point where it's like I am so tired of like getting an email saying something about Black lives. It's like this is so it just feels so performative because like, this is not to do with like you and like some the product or the service that you offer. So like recently it's gotten even worse, and you're just like, or I'm just like, wow, this is not gonna go away like on its own. Like it has to be given even more attention. You don't want to feed it, but it just keeps going further. So you have to start saying something.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, Desi-Rae, because I wanted to ask you about the past 3 or 4 months. And one of the best examples of what's been going on has been kind of the weird corporate just homogenization around Black Lives Matter and critical race theory and stuff. Because I also had an impression during this whole thing with the culture war for the past few years, up until June with the riots and everything, and what we saw, what was also an acceleration of cancel culture. A lot of people getting fired for speaking out against some of the woke stuff, especially the race-related stuff, what I kind of refer to as cancel culture 2.0. There seemed to be this massive escalation, like to the point where it's like that was just the beginning, everything up until June of 2019, and now we're getting like the sequel, which is way worse. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, is that kind of how you see it? Do you think there was this kind of escalation point that has made it so that it's kind of impossible to ignore? Or do you think it goes back further than that, or that maybe we haven't reached kind of the big blow up yet? Because I saw June as like the big, I saw that as like the moment where I've started telling people like, we can't ignore this. This is going to be the kind of the fight for the next 10 years is going to be about all of this stuff.
10 years? Wow. Yeah.
I think this thing will last 10, maybe even longer
I
than that.
mean,
Yeah.
that makes sense because I think it's taken like 10 years, like it's been like a decade. I came to the US in 2010, and I definitely don't think people were like this. They were like, they cared about social issues maybe too much. I went to a really liberal arts, liberal school, a liberal arts college. And I don't think I didn't really think about it that much. I just thought people were like kind of artsy and cared about social issues, and like that was cool. But that's very different from like like nonstop advocacy and like kind of pushing things down people's throats. So I would say that it kind of grew from it took like a decade. I do think it started before these past 4 months. I just think they're like different steps and levels, and it just that's how things grow. They start really small, and then like they expand and you kind of don't notice them until they're like huge. However, I don't know if we're not at the peak. I'd say we're very near, because having like critical race theory stuff and just basic white people bad, like it's really that
Yeah,
basic.
it's awful.
Reaching like government levels, like I think I'm not quite sure how much further you can go, especially like the United States government. Maybe you could say that it's going to expand more globally. So I definitely notice this pattern of, you know, because American politics are, say, talking about um, oppression from, I don't know, European colonization or something. Then other countries start following suit and start like analyzing their own historical narrative through the same kind
Hmm.
of idea. So maybe globally it's going to spread some more, but I'm not quite sure. Um, I think it's reached the height of its power when you have, you know, like Nike or Oreos, you know, preaching to you about some social issue, and like all these major corporations using their brands to help, in their opinion, drive positive change in the world. That's the status quo now. So maybe it's reached the heights of power, but in terms of the height of its impact, it still has more to go, because it still has to like spread like its tentacles down through these institutions a bit more, not just like in
Hmm.
academia, where a lot of this stuff sprouted, but in everyday social life. If you want to go get a smoothie from somewhere, you gotta like take the, I don't know, Black Lives Matter pill or something, along with whatever service you want in society. So maybe in that sense, there's still more to go, but I do think it's reached like the height of like potential power.
Yeah, I think as ubiquitous as it is, I wish I shared your optimism in that I think it could get much, much worse. I honestly I've been thinking about how I, I think it's possible that you're right that we've sort of reached a certain inflection point, because I've seen people kind of cross over into realizing how bad it is. People like Matt Taibbi and even J.K. Rowling kind of stepping into the fray to an extent. But I'm worried about the ways that this could get even worse. One of the things I bring up on the show from time to time is I think there could be federal hate speech legislation. So legislation that would prevent you from, misgendering someone like that. I think that could be introduced in the next 5 to 10 years. So,
You
for
think
instance,
so?
yeah, if I think that if Joe
Wow.
Biden wins the presidency and is under enough pressure from that side, he has shown a tendency to give in when pressured. And certainly, if Kamala Harris were to ascend to the presidency, because Joe Biden is quite old, I wish him the best of health, but he could pass away at his age, and Kamala Harris could ascend to the presidency, or he could resign due to cognitive issues. I think she would be more than happy to do whatever the woke supremacists, as I call them, tell her. So I'm worried it could get much worse, actually. And that's kind of why I on this show I'm always talking about, like, what are we doing? What are the strategies that we're going to utilize to fight back against this thing? On that note, I wanted to ask you, in the environment that we're kind of talking about, I mentioned cancel culture 2.0, kind of just the acceleration we've seen with people getting fired. I've talked about kind of the personal consequences. I know you've had issues with, I think it was PayPal, and other
Oh
issues
yeah.
where people come after you. Well, how do you think we get people to speak up and fight back against this thing in an environment where the cost incurred can be so high for doing so? Because we need people to speak out. I think that the way we avoid federal hate speech legislation, the way that we avoid more Antifa attacks, is through people coming out of the woodwork and expressing what are mainstream opinions. For instance, I don't think 8-year-olds should transition, their sex, or I don't think riots are a good way to solve our problem. These things that are mainstream
Right.
opinion, but if you say them, you can get in a lot of trouble. How do we overcome that, you think?
Yeah, that's really really weird. That it's these opinions are mainstream, but people are afraid to say it.
Mhm.
Just before I answer your question, I wanted to say that you gave a very concrete example of how you thought things could get worse with that hate speech potential um, law at a federal level, and yeah, that's a good point, and I'd be interested in like hearing further concrete examples you might have. I just wanted to say that. And then how to get people to speak out. Well, um, I think you appeal to them. I do try to do that. I do try to say, like, sometimes on my Twitter feed, for example, this is only going to get worse unless people like speak their truth, like say how they really feel, um, and that has different layers. So that's speaking up at work, but that's also just speaking up in regular conversations with people. I actually have a very good example. I just recently I went to the store to get my car inspected. It wasn't a store, the also shop or whatever you call it, and there was some guy there from Greece, and he
Hmm.
started like well, at first he just well, the hearings were going on with Amy Coney Barrett, and I asked him, hey, can I like turn up the thing? I was just like being polite, and so it kind of like started a conversation. He was like, sure, and then it I don't know how it came up, but he brought up people being potentially racist. Like this was in New Hampshire, which I moved to recently, and he was just like kind of going on about how because he's from Greece, like people it used to be really bad and people were mean to him. And of course, I was like, I'm sorry that happened to you. I don't actually know if it's true, but I was like, it seemed like it was. So I said, I'm sorry that happened to you. But he was kind of like talking as if I would like think that, say, New Hampshire, for example, was racist, and I was like, no, that's actually not been my experience. Like, yeah, and I could have just not bothered to say anything because, first of all, sometimes I just don't want to talk to people when they're around me, so I would just like kind of end the conversation by not keeping it going.
Hmm.
But I was like, I'm just gonna like say like my story, and sometimes people just wouldn't bother to do that. Like, there's something as simple as that. I think is useful. Um, so I think you have to be honest with yourself about how you feel because social pressure is very, very, very powerful. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that as like humans, we have to connect with other people. And so like that's like part of what makes it happen is like you care about like what people think to a certain extent. However, I also think you have to um accept yourself. And so I think it starts with being willing to stand up for yourself almost. You have to be willing to say, I care about like having my own mind and thoughts and like living in, I guess, my truth. So if you're worried about, losing your job, etc., I think that it's just a choice you have to make. Like, what is worth more to you? If you think your job is worth more to you than potentially losing it or having like a temporary period of turmoil, which I'll explain in a second, then you can choose your job. Like, I think no one else can make that choice for you. However, I would also say that once you make that leap, if you decide to do it, you will eventually like find support. So I do think that even though it might be hard at first, it's just like kind of you rearranging your life around you because you're gonna attract a different like set of like people and circumstances because of you deciding to make that change. So I think you make an appeal, and then some people will listen and some people won't, but you just keep making that appeal.
Yeah, Desiree, I love the point you made about kind of being willing to reorient your life a little bit, especially in terms of kind of like who you're going to be able to associate with. Because I found that when I kind of came out as anti-woke, I mean, you almost want to say came out as conservative because that's what you hear online, but I'm not even conservative. I'm just anti-woke. And you'll find that it's so shocking sort of where the support comes from. If you're someone like me who was on the left, sorry about the siren, it's gone now.
Yeah.
So if you're someone like me who was on the left, and you just end up super shocked at all of the attacks that you get for the people you kind of considered your people, and then you get all of this support from people who you've never talked to before, who may also be on the left, but in many cases are on the right politically or in the center politically, kind of where I am now. And there's this thing that you can do. You mentioned finding support, and it's like, yeah, you can actually get a lot of support. That's one of the things that I talk with friends about, and that I try to talk to people kind of in the resistance network about, is we need to create support structures Like I saw there was a thing called anti-woke HR, and it's a job board for companies that don't engage in, like, diversity training or woke nonsense, and they don't ask people those kind of things in the interview process. And I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of thing we need to be doing, is setting up professional and personal support networks. A while back, I started a local discussion group for the intellectual dark web where people could have these conversations, and they were all saying, like, this is one of the only places I can go to do this. I think that's a very important aspect. So I'm glad you mentioned kind of find support. Like, don't, like, if you're afraid to go it alone, don't. You asked me something specifically, though, that you wanted me to address, which is more examples of how this could get worse. And I don't want to skip over that since you're curious. One of the other things, before we get too far away from it, I mean, for people like you and me who are sort of online personalities, I always worry about the extent of the censorship that could appear. So I check my channel like every night. I'm a little paranoid to see if it's still there, for instance. I really do. I really do. And it's a terrible feeling. I see people on YouTube every day. Usually they're people who are a little bit edgier than I am getting deleted from YouTube. I like to think my show is pretty chill. I don't think I'm too crazy or too far in any one direction, but I am against the orthodoxy. And on some level, I'm an enemy of the woke, state thing. So I think that one way it could get worse is I worry about just sort of like a mass control over the information. So if people like you and me, who are perfectly reasonable, middle of the road people, were to get deleted from social media one day, and then what do? They start deleting maybe bigger voices like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro. I mean, we saw on Twitter, there was an attempt recently to take a New York Post investigation that could hurt Joe Biden in the election and just completely stuff it down so that no one sees it. And it was very 1984, very Orwellian, very creepy. And I worry about the acceleration of that. I worry about, in terms of ways things could get worse, the diversity trainings will come back if Trump loses, because I think that the Biden administration will reinstate them. And then those could become ways to out people. So for instance, in a lot of workplaces, they ask you to put your pronouns in your bio. And if you don't, they might pull you into HR. And so I think there's sort of
do
this.
That.
I have seen it myself.
Wow.
It's something that you see. And by the way, not always in places that are super woke even. They'll just, they'll get older people who aren't super woke to just think that it's a nice thing to do without kind of the subtext of the fact that it's a way to out people. So I think that there's there are quite a number. I could do a whole podcast on my most like pessimistic, black-pilled outlook, which, by the way, I don't necessarily think is the result. Maybe this thing gets resolved before these things get as bad as they do. I'm perfectly open to that. I don't think it'll be resolved in the next 4 or 5 years. I will say that. I do not think that the woke supremacist incursion on our society will be resolved for at least about 4 years. I think that it'll take a while. My main reason for that being that I don't think Biden will help, and I don't think Trump will either. I think this election is a wash. I don't think either of them are capable of handling it properly. And I think that the presidency actually is relevant in the conversation, unlike some people.
Oh wow, yeah, you're definitely thinking like kind of like a high level and analytical from a political standpoint. I guess thanks for those examples. They're really good examples. You said something earlier that I can't remember, that I was really surprised that you saying. I can't remember what you said. I do agree that just the last bit you said, that there is like a cultural movement that's outside of just like who's the president. So that is a good point. I never thought about that. Yeah, I guess my mind wasn't thinking that high level as you are in terms
I'm
of.
sorry to blackpill you. I hate to do this. People go like, "Oh, this could get so much worse," and then it's
Well, I've thought
to some
that
extent,
too, but not like, just not in those specifics. I'm thinking more like communism, cultural revolution kind of thing, which is just as bad. But it just seems like that's really far away. But you're giving very, very specific things, like the diversity trainings, mandatory diversity training, possibly with like any federal employee could come back. Like, you're right.
Yeah.
That does seem like actually very, very reasonable. And it's going to be in like public school education. And a lot of people don't have that choice or want to make that choice about, possibly not having their kids go to public school. So that is scary. I think that maybe I am a bit more optimistic, because in my head, if things peak more, as you put it, then eventually people are gonna like fight back.
Mhm.
Maybe it's gonna be like a dark a dark age, or a dark age of, I don't know, woke, the dark age of woke. Like, that'll be written
Yeah.
down. Maybe it's like, I don't know, it sounds horrible, like a 20-year period where everyone had to like identify themselves by their pronouns, and you couldn't misgender anyone, and like just saying the wrong thing could maybe land you in jail, or maybe you couldn't receive some kind of benefits. Maybe you had to
Yeah.
pay extra taxes, or you
They
couldn't
are
afford
vicious. They go after
welfare,
people in these ways.
or yeah, or something like that. I guess I think that eventually people would get sick of it. And I also like when people point out that the American populace is like armed, so that that might make a big difference if things really like came to a head.
Yeah, these are all possibilities I've kind of been mapping out, which is so for me, the worst case scenario, which I don't currently think is going to be the case, but what I map out is kind of like this is the floor, this is the worst possible thing that could happen, is like a 1984 scenario where there's total informational control by this faction, this woke faction. And in that scenario, I do imagine, as you kind of alluded to, that there would be, unfortunately, but it's better than just being under authoritarian rule, there might be an armed conflict, especially in a country that is very much armed. And
Yeah.
that is one possibility. I also think that the let's talk about the best case scenario, right? I'll give people a little bit of optimism from me. I do think that we are seeing a little bit of an emergence of resistance to this thing on the left. I mentioned J.K. Rowling, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald is another great example. There are people who you wouldn't necessarily expect to care about these issues and to give credence to these cultural issues. Matt Yglesias at Vox was talking about it, and that was really surprising. And having them kind of arrive, in some ways, I've sort of seen that as maybe that's the cavalry. I mean, people like me, I was solidly on the left until just a couple of years ago. I think that there's been an expansion of the coalition of resistance actors, and that in the next few years there could be a groundswell big enough that we could elect someone to the presidency or have some kind of cultural impact. I don't think it comes through Trump. A lot of people do. I don't. I think it comes through someone a little bit more nuanced. I talk about Dan Crenshaw a lot. He's a guy I really like. But in any case, I think that this could be. I try to keep my idea of where this could go pretty broad. So like worst case scenario is like 1984 Civil War. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but that could, I'm not ruling it out. Best case scenario is in like 4 or 5 years, we get, I think, a moderate Republican in the presidency, somebody who understands this stuff, who knows what to do, ban the critical race theory, stuff like that. And somebody who articulates it and markets it better than Trump does. I actually think he's really bad at this. And then I think this thing gets resolved pretty quickly. But I try to tell people that there's a really wide range of possibilities. I mean, we haven't even lived through the 2020 election, so we don't even know how that shakes
Oh
out
my
yet. There are a
God,
lot
I
of
know.
unanswered questions. I know. I wanted to
So
ask
yeah.
you about, since we brought up the election, I've seen you mention on Twitter concern about the sort of unending and increasing polarization that we're experiencing. Do you think that that's something that could be resolved in the near future, or do you think we're kind of past a point of no return? Yeah. So talk to me about that, where it's just going to keep getting worse.
I think we're past the point of no return. I kind of think like the I mean, I think people should go their own way,
Hmm.
because there's a fundamental. There are people who think that the U.S. is a good place, and then there are people who think that it was just founded on pure evil and shouldn't exist. Like, I just don't see how you reconcile those two things. So the people who want to like destroy it to make what they want are in opposition to the people who think what's here is like good. It's already good, and it could be improved, but like it's fundamentally good. So I I think I used to, maybe not even before this year, but like before this year, I probably say, yeah, people should. I still think people should work on being kind to each other. However, sometimes the best thing to do when you have a disagreement is to find a way to make it work for both people, and that can mean that you can't like operate in the same space like that. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's like a potential
I often say
disruption
a
or
national
rupture that,
divorce.
yeah, maybe
You
that's
could have
what,
a national divorce, essentially, a secession.
yeah,
Because
maybe,
you mentioned how people are just so far apart that it
right.
seems irreconcilable, and that is language that is used in a divorce. And I do think that we are kind of, irreconcilable differences, right? That's the most common thing that's put down. It's kind of a generic way for individuals to get divorced. But I always say this: I can have a
well, the
conversation with people. Go ahead.
well, the reason why it's irreconcilable is because people want everybody to follow their rules. Like the way I kind of
Hmm.
understood the US is like they're different states and they can kind of like do their own thing, but people want to enforce like their idea on everybody else. So that's really where the issue comes in. It's like when you have these woke people wanting everybody like by law to have to do certain things to like there to be progress in the world, and like they always put the moral stake extremely high. Like if we don't like fix the climate, everybody's gonna die. And it's like horrendous that you cannot see how like I don't know, some minority group is being treated badly because they always set that moral bar so high. It's like it has to be enforced or else you're like permitting evil to like run amok in the world. And so it's because you have that like more top down view versus like how can we find ways to bring people into like our view of the world that they can also walk away from. So I think if things were more localized, like if people wanted to do some diversity thing and they wanted to promote it, but not like getting into big corporations and like kind of like going to the heights of power to make everybody else do it. That's a different thing. So if I guess I'm specifically talking about wokeness, but I think you could apply it to other things too. Like that's when it's like irreconcilable.
I agree. I think that there's an aspect of demanding that everyone sort of be the same and have the same views and the same lifestyle that creates, I think, inevitably a massive conflict and possibly effectively a national divorce. Because you can live together in a country, we can coexist as long as sort of there's this idea of, okay, on one hand, let's say we have the most woke left-wing family imaginable. They're raising their son to be a girl or whatever, and like they live next door to the most conservative family in the world that has guns out the wazoo and they go to church every Sunday. And as long as they have this understanding that they live next to each other and they don't have to interact, or maybe they wave hello in the morning as they're driving their kids to school, and they can coexist. They don't have to tell each other, like, basically you have the one family doesn't go to the other family and say you need to go to church like me, and the other family doesn't say you need to let your son transition into a girl like we are, or like whatever. They sort of have this understanding of they're each going to live their own separate lives. I think that we are losing that because one side is sort of unwilling to make that compromise. But the thing that's interesting about this that I always like to point out is I sometimes wonder if that's just a matter of who has the cultural power to be that demanding. Because I say, like, hypothetically, if the right-wing Christian fundamentalists had that power culturally, which they don't have, but they kind of used to have, they would make some of those same demands. And they did back when they used to tell people you can't be gay, you can't play violent video games, things like this. So I always try to point out, I'm not on the right, I'm not on the left. This is something that can happen on either side. But right now, the cultural power is with this kind of left-wing woke thing. And so they are wielding that power. And they're also coming into power during a time where there's social media and there's all these ways to wield it so efficiently. And they're sort of breaking down the social contract of letting people live differently than they would have them live ideally.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you just said. I wanted to add, I mean, you kind of already said it, but just to restate another way, it's really the like with the families, it's the co-opting of power. So like for example, with those two families, instead of just having like two separate schools or possibly three if there was a third, family, I guess. I mean, not to take this theoretical idea too far, but since it's only three families, the school would probably just be like a home school for each one. But you can like expand the idea a bit larger. Instead of having two schools, there's one, and then like instead of letting these divisions kind of play out so you could possibly split off, then it's like co-opting that one school and saying, oh, well, you don't want your child to do this, like I'm gonna make it so because I can. And I think it's like right. So it's really like the co-opting of institutions that have power, just to add to what you're saying.
No, it's the invasion of every space where people who are heterodox, whether they're conservative or they're more on the center left, it's every single space which wasn't under the control of the woke supremacists, whether it's a school, whether it's a culture. I always bring up gaming culture. That was a culture that was at one point very inoculated from this stuff. It was a very sort of politically incorrect culture. It was dominated by a bunch of young guys and who loved to be very politically incorrect. If you've ever been in an Xbox Live chat room, it was not a very politically correct place, probably still isn't. But that was a place that was sort of, it was a place, yeah, it was a place that was sort of invaded by the feminist wing, particularly around the time of Gamergate. You also see this, with schools. I mean, schools, when I went to school, wasn't that long ago. I'm only 25. When I was in grade school, there was a basic understanding where I lived. Granted, I lived in a kind of like country club Republican town. My family was liberal, but I lived in a red area. And in the school that I went to, there was this basic understanding of like, hey, we respect all views, whether they're left or right. And also the teachers didn't share their political views with the students. There was sort of this allowing certain spaces to be apolitical. Because that's the thing,
Right.
Gaming was an apolitical space. It was not right wing. It was just a space where people played video games and made a lot of funny jokes that were not particularly politically correct. And every single space is being politicized because you have this group that just doesn't want to let things happen organically. They want to intrude everywhere. Honestly, it's power hungriness. And it's very scary to behold just because of how much power they already wield. And it's never enough. It's like they'll go to your schools, they'll go into your homes. I think, again, worst case scenario, they knock on your door if your 8-year-old has gender dysphoria and they say, we got to haul them off to get hormone treatments. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing. I mean, actually, there was a case in Texas where it was, I think the two parents disagreed. The dad didn't want to have this on. Yeah, James Younger. Yeah. So, I mean, we're seeing things like that where it's like they just won't let people even raise their own families.
Yeah.
It is just reaching that point where we could get to, again, the national divorce because there's no agreement on basic principles of, okay, we're not going to hit each other, no Antifa, no violence. There's no agreement on freedom of speech. These are things where there was broad agreement on the left and right for decades, and it allowed us to thrive as a society. But we've lost those principles, and frankly, the attack has come from this woke thing. I don't know if I even want to call it the left, but whatever it is responsible for breaking down social institutions. The ones I always bring up are free speech, due process, and nonviolence. Just this understanding that we resolve our conflicts peacefully. And we are seeing that broken down to this degree that it's irreconcilable.
I mean, I do think that I mentioned this, I guess, recently, that there is a way to culturally kind of downshift all these changes, because I think it's important to remember that people are being bombarded with these woke dogma, with the woke religion. They're like constantly being preached at. So I don't think that how things are right now are natural. You could say that there's always some propaganda that like is being preached by the state, but maybe that's useful to keep the nation together. That's another topic. Like, of course, the state in and of itself can be bad, etc. But I do think that there's a path to reverse things by simply just turning it off. I don't know how you turn it off, but maybe if people weren't being bombarded so much, things could slowly just go in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I think that the way that I always think about strategies of kind of how do we reverse this process, because the ideal scenario is we stop it and we reverse it. We go back to the way we were before, where we weren't smacking each other around and not respecting freedom of speech and things like that. I think there has to be some kind of projection of the message. So like Joe Rogan is the best example of someone who's able to just get the message out to as many people as possible that this is even a problem. Because a lot of people, if you ask them about culture war issues, they go, that's not really that important. Like, talk to me about the economy and healthcare and nothing else. I don't want to hear about this transgender stuff. It doesn't really affect anyone. People don't know how much it actually does impact people's lives until they hear Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan. So I guess I want to throw it back to you, Desi-Rae. What do you think are some of the ways that the kind of conversations we're having right now can be projected to a larger audience? I love my audience, but I've got about 1,500 people. It's not quite enough to, even if every single one of them starts, it gets inspired and starts having conversations, it's not quite enough. And it seems like Rogan isn't even necessarily quite enough either. I mean, how do you think we just get this message out that like, hey, like, how do we ring the alarm for people? Because I think people are sort of asleep. They're sort of like, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. It's just some crazy college kids. You still hear that.
I actually think exactly what you're doing now. Like, you're like describing yourself as a small channel, but like I mean, of course, some people can have done something before. Like, they start small and then they grow. Mm-hmm. So I think what you just said, like inspiring people through conversation. You can think of it from more like a tactical perspective, like you were talking about Joe Rogan, and like he already has an audience. And then I would say through people who have an audience and maybe are not super edgy, but are appealing to people, like a politician, like that kind of persona that people want to listen to, like people being like not sort of in the trenches like you and I, but I don't know, listening to NPR while they're like cooking a meal or something, like maybe through like politicians, I would say. Or yeah,
no, that's something I've actually brought up on the show before. I was doing an episode, I think, with the Distributists, and I mentioned how there's a power of the presidency in particular that is not just political, it's informational. It's a communications thing where people want to listen to the president. People watch press. If the president, whoever it is, even if it's Trump, if he says, I have an emergency press conference at noon, people listen. And so I'm hoping somebody can get elected to the presidency, kind of as you said. It can be a politician. It could be someone who's not necessarily a commentator type figure like we are. Somebody who has a little bit more of a sort of a credibility that is inherent, right? The power of the presidency is this incredible credibility that you have. But what I always kind of say is Trump isn't a good person for this. I think there's a lot of people who thought Trump was going to kind of be the savior, and it's like, oh, he's going to share the message about the culture war. And I'm like, we need someone who is more articulate, more nuanced, and just more mature than Trump. I've been very frustrated because what you said is very, very true. A politician can have a big impact. Some people think that politicians can't do shit, and it's like they actually can do a lot. Trump has done some things like banning the critical race theory, but he's just not articulate enough. Is there anyone that you can think of that, I don't know, are there any politicians that you're a fan of, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, that you think like, yeah, that's someone maybe who understands this woke stuff more, is a little bit more nuanced? Maybe you are a fan of Trump, I don't know. I mean, who do you think that person should be? Because someone's got to do it. I do think we need a president in the near future, and unfortunately, we're not going to get one for at least 4 more years. I think we need someone who can kind of pick up the mantle of this fight as president.
I don't really follow politicians. I'm kind of ambivalent on Trump. I kind of like his kind of like crass personality, but I don't love him or anything, and I don't hate. So I'm not like a big fan, and I think he's just like a product of that I really PC society. So people kind of wanted the opposite. And I also don't like how I mean, not so much now, but like when he first came out, everybody just like was always hating him. It seemed disingenuous. I did like Tulsi. Like, I just liked her vibe, but I mean, I'm not like super involved in politics, so I can't like say that much about that. I'm more like
I'm writing in Tulsi Gabbard's name for president. So you really hit the nail on the head for me. I've said on the show before, I'm not voting for Biden or Trump. You got it. that's my girl. Okay. I think Tulsi's a good example. Do you know about Brett Weinstein's Unity 2020 campaign?
I just saw it on Twitter and that they were having like Twitter like blocked them.
Yeah. Yeah, it ended up, of course, it failed. It materialized way too late. But he had selected Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, someone I mentioned earlier, as the potential candidates. I just think it's funny that you mentioned Tulsi,
Well, because
even though,
she's like kind of firm but pleasant at the same time. Like so, she has
yes,
this like strength to her that I think you kind of need. But then at the same time, she's like not like nobody like I don't really know anyone who hates her. Like she doesn't have such a strong reaction like with like Trump does with people, for example. So that's why like in my mind, she stands out in that way.
yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I kind of am looking for, and why I like Tulsi is that I think we need someone who is strong, understands the dangers of wokeness, the dangers of the fight against free speech and Antifa and things like that, but somebody who is not as divisive as Trump. I think that the way his personal style turns off so many people that could be helping us in this fight. I have had many conversations with friends and family members where I'm like, hey, watch this documentary about Evergreen College. And then they'll say, oh, those people are awful. And I'm like, oh, good. And then they say, yeah, but they're not as bad as Trump. And I'm like, oh, like I can't. Trump creates this wall where, to be honest, a part of me is almost looking forward to maybe Biden winning the election. Even though I'm not voting for Biden, I do kind of think, well, if with Trump gone, maybe I can start to have conversations with some of these people where they're not immediately bringing up Trump and just saying, oh, well, if I'm anti-woke, that means I'm pro-Trump. And it's like, no, he's very toxic for the sort of resistance brand that I'm trying to sort of sell to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that you brought up Tulsi. Um,
I definitely get what you're saying.
yeah, there's a balance to be struck there. I think that I
I've
think that
heard
people
I've heard
go ahead.
I've just heard a lot of people say what you say, what you just said in terms of Trump being so divisive. Like it's like it almost seems better to have Biden win, and then also that he's not the best person to be against woke stuff for the same reasons. I've just heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah, I think it's something that gets brushed under the rug too much, especially by people who are on the right. And just out of curiosity, are you a Democrat, Independent, Republican? Are you
Well, I
like
can't vote. Like I'm not a citizen,
oh,
so I can't vote.
ah.
But so that's probably one reason I'm more focused on the culture stuff.
Yes.
But I also pretty sure that I would be independent. Like I'm
Yeah.
like not yeah. Like I think I lean if I were to lean any direction, I don't really like labels. It would be like more libertarian than anything else. So I wouldn't be like
Yeah.
classifying myself as left or right. But then if I had to pick between left and right, I would definitely pick right. So I
Yeah.
guess like kind of briefly
I
on
get
it.
it. Yeah. I want to ask you, I mean, focusing more on culture than politics, which cultural institution do you think is the one that maybe needs to be kind of saved from itself first? I always sort of, and let me know if you think I'm missing one. I always say there's four big cultural institutions that have been infected by wokeness. It's the government, really mostly through the Democratic Party. It's the media, the legacy media. It's big tech, and it's academia. Of those four institutions, which are kind of, I mean, the government obviously is a government institution, but the other three are cultural institutions. Which one do you think kind of has the biggest negative impact and needs to be kind of dealt with first? Because I sort of always say academia, big tech, and the media are just really the three institutions that are completely taken over by the woke, especially over the course of the past few months, and they're really doing a number on us. Which one would you if you could snap your fingers and make one of them like better, which one would you do?
You said academia, big
Academia,
tech.
the news media, and big tech.
Oh, academia, the news media, and big tech. Uh, hmm, I'm definitely okay. So I'm just guiding through my process. I first thought about family. That's the first thing I thought of because I do think
Hmm.
that society is made up of like family units and like interpersonal stuff, and then that kind of grows out from there. Um, then I'm thinking that it's between academia and the media, and then I'm in my head I'm narrowing it down to media.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the media because like academia, you I would say that a lot of this woke stuff came out of academia, and it's still coming out of academia. But people don't read papers. Like the regular people don't read papers, and it's like it kind of filters down into like cultural patterns that start like intellectually, but I don't think they're gonna get anywhere without the media spinning events that occur that they're reporting on into the framework that comes from academia. So even if the framework from academia might shift in a positive way, I think it's up to the media in terms of how they're reporting on things um, that that the masses, I guess, get more. So I would pick media. I pick
I
media.
I I would tend to agree with you. I've been saying that the media, and I sort of have good news on this front, in that I think the media is going to be the first one to hopefully get reformed, and I'll explain why. The media is people people have this thing where they see something on CNN or they see something on NBC and they think it's real. Like, to them, that's what makes something real. That's what tells them what they should be caring about. And right now, the media is telling them not to care about Antifa, not to care about some of these culture war issues. It's telling them to hate Trump and to hate Republicans and to look out for racism in every corner because it's everywhere. And that if we don't get, I sort of refer to it as like a constant IV drip. If we don't take the IV drip of propaganda that people are constantly on out, if we don't kind of disconnect them from the matrix, that's another good way to put it. If we don't red pill them, it's the name of the show. If we don't do that, then we can't get anywhere. And that kind of starts with the media. And I think there's some potential there because guess what? Media ratings are dropping. The media, the legacy media industry is dying. And somebody like Joe Rogan has emerged as a humongous threat to them. And you know it because they attack him and they attack people like Philip DeFranco, people like us constantly because we're threats to them. So do you think, I mean, how optimistic are you? That's something where I'm a little more optimistic. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we could see CNN and MSNBC go out of business. And I think that would be one of the best things for our society.
I don't know if they're going to go out of business, but I do think that they are going to continue suffering consequences, and it's all by their own fault. I just think that they're corrupt, and like just eventually you start to see the effects of that, where people realize that you can't trust them, and like they're just kind of digging their own grave. Because now, like every time I see a report on something, I'm like, oh wow, I can't even make up my mind about this. I'm gonna have to go like spend time either looking at what other people, because it takes time to like know if something is true, which is why you kind of use trusted news sources as I guess you could say a heuristic for whether or not something is true or false or relatively investigated well. You know, that's why like if I see the Wall Street Journal, which I think kind of still has its reputation okay compared to like the New York Times, I would say.
Right.
Report on something, I'm like, this is a news story that I should pay attention to, and maybe they're like slightly biased, but I know they're kind of giving me the facts. And like the more that gets eroded, the less trust you have. So I just think I agree with you. I think that they're gonna suffer the consequences, but I think they might reform themselves. I think it's possible versus them like completely disappearing. But people realize that they have to. I mean, I would think people are starting to realize that they can't look to those formerly established news sources anymore, and they're gonna start looking to independent journalists. Sorry, there's like a noise.
No, that's fine. Do you think there's potential for kind of what materialized with the intellectual dark web and all of the sort of like this gang of podcasters, people like Sam Harris, Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin? Do you think there's potential for them to kind of become the new commentariat? Because commentary is actually an essential aspect of journalism. Getting quality commentary that has a core of objectivity and kind of gets subjective from there, where there's agreement between people on basic facts, and all of those people do have an agreement on the basic facts. These are people who think there's two genders and that free speech is good. But they're all different people with different perspectives. Do you think there's potential there to, in effect, have that kind of cohort replace the commentary we have right now of like Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and people who are just spouting nonsense?
I do think so, but I don't just think on the right. So I don't follow them, but I know that they're like people on the left who espouse ideas that I don't agree with, who kind of rose in the same way as say people like Dave Rubin, for example. And I think that's not bad, because the issue with news like CNN is when they state that they are just news versus like what they really are, which is more like commentary and bias.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if people are like upfront about that, then people will wait. They'll be like, oh, I know that I'm only hearing one side of the story when I'm listening to this person, and then they might go and like go to like some other, I don't know, left leaning source. So I think there's a potential for that, and I don't understand the nuance of it, but I do worry that, I mean, it's not really something to worry about. I do think that it is possible um, that, say, a Dave Rubin, for example, could become established, and then it's not good if there isn't like room for new people to I guess grow or come up, um, to be found by audiences. So I'm trying to say that I don't necessarily think that it's a good thing in the long term that new independent journalists are being found compared to the current legacy media, if that environment that allowed these current independent journalists or commentators um, doesn't remain in place, because then they could become established and, you know, not have any potential alternative opinion to be heard that can keep them in check. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you want to sort of maintain the marketplace of ideas and sort of the checks and balances in a way where you have a little bit of a right-wing commentary, a little bit of a left-wing commentary at people who are trying to be super objective and in the center. And that, I think you mentioned, there are figures who are solidly on the left. I mean, somebody like Sam Harris is in the intellectual dark web, but he is also on the left politically. But then you have someone like Kyle Kalinske over at Secular Talk, or David Pakman. These are actually very left-wing figures. I mean, people who are still associated to some extent with, democratic politics, unlike a Sam Harris or a Brett Weinstein, who have left-wing views but are not associated with the left-wing establishment. And I think it's good that people like them rise up. I disagree with Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman on a lot of things, but I prefer them as sort of the preeminent YouTube leftist commentators. I prefer them to a Rachel Maddow or an Anderson Cooper. And so and also I think they've both been on Joe Rogan. So there's sort of a friendliness between the intellectual dark web and this left-wing YouTube commentariat that is not ideal in my opinion. I think they still miss the mark from time to time, but they are leagues above what we see on cable news. So I do like the idea that I think you were kind of alluding to the fact that we don't want the intellectual dark web to become an establishment and just become its own echo chamber, right? Because that's another risk that we see, is if Dave Rubin just were to become another Rachel Maddow. And some people have criticized Dave for becoming maybe a little bit too much of an establishment right-wing figure who isn't as independent as he used to be. I think some of that criticism is overdone. Dave is just such a huge influence on me. People who listen to the show probably can tell. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I was just gonna say, people say that once you get really big, it's just like, it's probably somewhat true, but it's just something people say.
People always bring out the grifter, the word grifter, right? That's
no,
everyone's
just like
favorite word.
Once people reach a certain point, and they become like a sellout, or I don't know. That's not the word you just used, but I can't remember the word you used. Like, people get criticized in this way once they reach a certain level. That's what I see all the time.
Yeah, it seems like you can't have any level. The word grifter in particular just became so popular in the past couple of years. It's just a very overused term. I put it up there with gaslighting. It's just like everyone is acting like they know what that word means, but they don't really know what it means.
Well, that's really funny because there was
No, go ahead.
There was a word that people used to use before that, but I can't remember it anymore. There was like the word that meant the exact same thing. No, it was like something like pundit, but not. It was just like another word, but not. Maybe it was charlatan. There was just like, it's just really interesting how in the span of like 4 years since I like started making videos, there was another word that people used to use that wasn't grifter, and it's like now completely gone.
Poser?
From like, no, I can't remember what it is. But it was like one of those words like it meant like charlatan or like pundit. It had this exact same meaning as grifter, but it wasn't. Yeah, I know I can't remember it at all.
Well, it's an
People use it all
accusation
the
as old as time, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something where I think you're right. People have to be ready. I mean, I don't know if anyone listening to the show has their own show or anything like that, but you got to be ready for people to come after you when you even get like the smallest. I mean, even I being at the level that I'm at, having a medium-sized audience or a smaller audience. Again, love you all 1,500 of you, but looking forward to some growth in the near future. But even at my level, I have people accusing me of being full of it or of. I especially find the grifting accusations annoying just because I haven't actually. The most convenient thing for me to do on this show would be to endorse Trump. That's how you get a lot of followers, as you say, oh, I used to be a liberal and now I love Trump and I'm a Republican. I'm not doing that because it's not what I believe.
Right.
But in any case, Desi-Rae, the last thing I want to ask you, I feel like we already talked about this a little bit, but I want to see if there's anything you want to add. This is a question I ask everyone on the show before we sign off. Are there any, we talked about this a little, but I want to see if there's anything you want to add. Are there any strategies or actions that you recommend to people generally to fight back against this woke thing?
Just speaking up. Like,
Yeah.
I know it's
No,
really hard, but
that's a great answer.
that's what is needed. And I just want to say one more thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with the concept of grifting in the first place. Like, if you're spending a lot of time doing something, like, I think it's fine to make money from it. I guess the thing is that you're lying about it, but nobody can know that about you. Like, only the person.
Everyone loves money.
Never know that. You know.
Yeah. If someone offered me, yeah, exactly. If someone gives you a briefcase full of $1,000, you're going to take it. I agree with you. Actually, the grifting thing is overdone because it implies that people shouldn't benefit from their commentary.
Yeah,
and
it's also,
that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like it's work. Like, do you not want people to be happy and successful? I think you should. I think people should.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope to become a professional myself. And yeah, there's really. Yeah, like you said, there's the point where people are being disingenuous with their commentary for increased exposure, and I think that's where the problem comes in. But just because people are successful and they're making money, if anything, that's something to be admired.
Yeah, but I also don't think we can really know that. Like, I really don't. Like, sometimes it might seem obvious. Like it's like, oh, I don't know. For example, like, I've seen some clips of, say, like, the Young Turks or something, and I'm like, how could they possibly, like, be saying that? But at the same time, like, I really don't know why people do what they do. Like, maybe if they didn't do that, some bad thing would happen to their, like, child or something. Like, I don't know. Like, I can't know the reasoning behind why people do what they do. And so in my mind, it's like, I wouldn't comment on something like that because I don't know. Like, I wouldn't call someone like a grifter. Like, I just don't know their story.
It's overly confident and overly speculative. This reminds me of a story I heard on a podcast about, it was something the Dalai Lama said, which is that there's an attitude you can take in life where you give people the benefit of the doubt and you read their actions charitably. The example he gave was, you're driving down the street and somebody cuts you off, and your first instinct is to flip them off and say, fuck you, why'd you cut me off? To imagine that they're just being a jerk and they're just going on. But that the thing that you can do in your mind is you can imagine in your head, and this is what you said kind of reminded me of this. You can have the charitable interpretation and say, oh, maybe this person, their wife is in labor and he really needs to get them to the hospital, and so he cut me off because he just really needs to get there as quickly as possible, and it's a beautiful thing and I'm happy for him. And that what you said kind of alludes to this idea of people shouldn't make the assumption that just because someone is maybe playing things up a little bit, maybe doing a little bit of a red meat act with their show. I think there are people who do this who are smart, good people. They go a little over the top to get more exposure, and they do it to various degrees. Sometimes it's worse than others, but they have their reasons for doing it. And I think people speculate a little bit too confidently. I think you make a good point. People go like, "Oh, I know exactly what this person is doing and why," and it's like, no, you don't.
Yeah. Yep.
In any case, we've reached the end of our hour. Another quick thing just before we sign off, is there anything you want to plug or promote? The link to Desi-Rae's YouTube channel and her Twitter will be in the description for today's episode. Is there anything else, though, Desi-Rae, that you want to promote while you're on today?
No, I would just, repeat what you just said, that you could find me on YouTube at Just Thinking Out Loud, or Twitter, DESIRAE, Thinking. And I also have a website, justthinkingoutloud.tv. You could check out my content and follow me on those places.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being with us. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. Really helps the show. If you're listening on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. And with that, I'll see you next time on Red Pill Nation.